The United Nations has labelled gender-based violence a shadow pandemic as the number of incidents appear to have increased during COVID-19. One of the issues women are confronted with when reporting these crimes is they are often met by police officers who are not equipped to deal with such cases. Well, to discuss this further, I'm joined by Brian Sithole, Director of the One Strong Voice Foundation, and Lisa Vetten, gender-based violence researcher at the University of Johannesburg. Thank you so much for your time, Brian and Lisa. Brian, perhaps let's start with you. We recently heard that around 13 police stations in Gauteng alone remain a worry for the high number of GBV cases they are handling. It seems that some police officers have received training if the security cluster meeting in September of 2020 is anything to go by. Is the training sufficient?
Good afternoon to all the viewers wherever they are. In terms of this pandemic, the gender-based violence and femicide pandemic, I feel that especially in our locations, we haven't received that type of knowledge to say people have been trained, police have been trained. I even called our local police station around here to ask a constable, have you ever had anybody receiving training in that police station? Unfortunately, there was no information, even the police themselves, that they do have in terms of if they have received any training. So till this far, we haven't heard about it.
Now, Lisa, you've spent more than 30 years immersed in the field of violence against women. Speak to me about the government's response over the years to GBV. The numbers tell us this has not been effective, and I mean, just listening to what Brian has to say about the intention that was made, even by President Cyril Ramaphosa, to have these police officers trained, and nothing has happened with the police officers. I mean, they're still not trained.
No, I think the problem here is that government keeps providing the same old solutions, despite the fact that they haven't worked in the past. They keep jumping to their same favorite, which is training. And I don't think they're stepping back to ask the larger question of why is training not succeeding? And for some of the work that we've done, there's a suggestion that they're not paying enough attention to individual station culture, because there are some stations that actually do a very good job. We've done what we call mystery clients, where you approach the police and ask for shelter as if you were somebody in an abusive relationship, and have had police respond incredibly well, and police officers respond incredibly poorly. So that tells you something about the difference in management and style of management and what is going on in an individual station. There's very little attempt being made by the police to learn why it is that some stations, with the same amount of training, with as few resources as any other station, can do a good job. So government doesn't do a proper diagnosis of why things do and don't work. I also don't think it takes the kind of stance it should towards ensuring that police officers manage these cases properly. One doesn't see the kind of disciplinary action being taken. One doesn't see provincial commissioners and station commanders being held accountable in the way that they should. And as I said, there is insufficient understanding of what it is that happens in the charge office that causes this slip between the training that is done and the way in which somebody is then assisted. And finally, I don't think the police have thought enough about how to debrief their officers around the effects of the lockdown. We've been doing some research now with shelters, asking about how the police engage with them during the lockdown. One of the comments they've made was that in some provinces, the police have become worse because they took such a militarized, authoritarian approach to enforcement during this period that they've yet to step out of it and take a more empathic, supportive and understanding approach to the complexities of gender-based violence now, even though the lockdown has eased.
Now, Lisa, we'll come back to the training of those police officers and specifically looking at these police stations. Now, answer this. I've asked you about, just to speak to us about government's response over the years to GBV. I mean, with the Cyril Ramaphosa administration, we saw those 3 bills finally being tabled and signed. What's been what's been the effort and the political will over the past couple of years, specifically looking at the presidents?
Well, I think we had significant will under President Mandela It more or less sustained under President Mbeki, who became a lot more technocratic. It vanished utterly under President Zuma, and I would say was in some instances subverted. And so I think that was that was a decade that we lost, that was turned into a wasteland. And so I think President Ramaphosa, although he's bringing a very strong political will, has an enormous difficulty because under President Zuma, government skill and capacity was significantly eroded. So part of the problem is that it's all very well to now try and fix the police response to GBV, but you've got to locate that within the overall context of a significantly weakened police service, of people appointed to inappropriate appointments to positions, of people who do not have the skills and do not have the competence, who you cannot now move out of the position, a lack of skill generally and a lack of inability to enforce what needs to be done, the taking of resources and using them in a corrupt manner, leaving inadequate money for doing the things that we need to do, like buying crime kits for the examination of rape complainants. So I think in 6 months or maybe the 2 years that he's been in position, President Ramaphosa has tried to make up for decades worth of neglect. And I'm afraid when you've eroded the state in this way, it's not a quick overnight turnaround and fix at all, unfortunately. You've got to fix government before you can even think about some of the problems of GBV, because the problems are those of government, not necessarily only the way in which they respond to GBV.
Now, Brian, listening to Lisa and also taking into consideration what was revealed earlier by the police minister, that there are 30 hotspots that have been identified, several communities where there are high prevalence of GBV cases. Do you think that identifying hotspots is a solution to the fight of gender-based violence?
Yes, it's true. In terms of, for an example, how we are still fighting COVID-19, the main thing which was done was to identify the hotspots where the pandemic is more severe. So it also helps in terms of identifying the hotspots of gender-based violence, so that all the focus, all the energy should be based on those places. And then you need to go deeper and find out what are the causes of this gender-based violence. We had an opportunity to sit down with the perpetrators themselves sometime last year. And those guys, the main thing that came out of that discussion was anger per se. So where does this anger come from? It comes from the households. So when you identify the hotspot, you need to go to the household and solve the problem from home. You cannot just solve the problem on the streets. Whatever that we see on television, on Newzroom Afrika, to say a woman was murdered, this has happened to a child, was raped, and so on. It's something that was being premeditated. It's something that was planned. It's not an overnight thing, but the perpetrator has planned this thing, that one day I want to do this thing. So you need to deal with the root cause first, the anger thing, what makes people to be angry. You need to get to the houses. Like, for an example, with the COVID-19, people were entering houses, testing people just to examine them, have had a cough, and so on. So these are the things. I've seen the Gauteng government has appointed the brigades, the gender-based violence and femicide brigades. So these are the people that are supposed to be going into the homes one by one, in terms of asking the families, how are you here? How are you being treated in this home? So in terms of, they need to, the police also themselves, they need to understand the law in terms of when a perpetrator is being charged with a certain charge, they need to understand the schedules, Schedule 1 up until Schedule 6. For an example, if somebody has committed a rape or somebody has violated a woman, you cannot charge them with Schedule 1, but you need to check whether the case falls under Schedule 5 or Schedule 6. So those are the type of training the police, they should understand, to say, like, as One Strong Voice Foundation, we are calling to say any case that is related to gender-based violence should be considered as a Schedule 6 matter, whereby it's going to make it difficult for the perpetrators to receive bail. Because now, what is happening, somebody commits a crime, they go to court, they get bail, the masses, they become angry, some of them, they want to take the law into their own hands. So this begins at a police station. The person should be charged under Schedule 6. Most of these gender-based violence and femicide cases most of them are premeditated cases. So they should be considered, all of them, as Schedule 6, so that it becomes difficult for the perpetrators to receive bail.
Now, Brian, you've raised a number of points, most of them very valid, but I want us to hone in on accountability. Earlier on, you said that you understood that after they identified these 30 hotspots of areas that are high in gender-based violence, police then made an undertaking that training would happen at some of these police stations. But that has not happened, Brian. I mean, some of the things that you say have been said for years, as we've heard earlier from what Lisa was talking about. How do we hold police accountable? But also, more importantly, how do we hold government accountable? Because they are the ones that are releasing these programs, but they're not implementing on them.
Okay. For an example, during the stringent COVID-19 level 5, the president will issue a statement to, they usually call it the family meetings in South Africa. So the president will issue a statement to say, this is what is going to happen, issue the regulations, cutting off alcohol, cutting so on and so on. So now, this is the very same strategy that can be used in terms of fighting this scourge. So when the Minister of Police issued a statement to say police need to go and do training, so this thing has to go down from the minister, it has to go down to the provinces, it has to go down to the regional municipalities, whereby you find the regional commissioners that are giving in the commandments. So it has to start from the minister has to push the provincial commissioners. After the provincial commissioners have been pushed, the regional commissioners has to do the work and make sure that the reports are sent to the provincial commissioner, and then the provincial commissioner is sending the reports to the national commissioner. And then the national commissioner will communicate with the minister in terms of how far has this thing gone? Like, I've implemented this program, so that you'll be able to trace, because the minister has issued a statement to say this is what is going to happen, but it's not reaching the ground on the regions. So it's very much important that we check the region, so that the region will be checking with the station commanders to make sure that this program is implemented, it's happening. Because at this point in time, I'm sure not all these areas are the police are receiving such type of training in terms of to fight the gender-based violence.
Brian, thank you so much for that response. We're running out of time, but Lisa, perhaps let me squeeze in one final question for you before we go. How do we coordinate all these efforts? I mean, we've seen a number of developments coming from President Cyril Ramaphosa in terms of his commitment in the fight against gender-based violence, and we're seeing communities really galvanizing to try and curb and minimize the scourge that is gender-based violence. How do we streamline all of these efforts into one coordinated fight?
Well, there is an attempt to set up a national council which will play this coordinating role. But unfortunately, it looks like it's being plagued by exactly the same kinds of problems that plague every other structure in this country. Fights over who's going to manage it, fights for power, inadequate resources, etc. I would think government might want to spend a little less time coordinating and bossing and managing things and actually going to research what's effective. Because I'm afraid some of the programs that they've put in place, there is research to show that those particular programs either make no difference or they make the problem worse, which is deeply concerning because it means government's just throwing money into things that are ineffective and worsen the problem. So if anything, I would suggest that they take a step back and actually stringently and critically evaluate what is being done, and then from there move forward.
All right, fantastic. Thank you so much. That's where we have to leave it for this afternoon. Brian and Lisa, thank you so much for your time. Brian Sitole, Director of the One Strong Voice Foundation, and Lisa Vetten, Gender-Based Violence Researcher at the University of Johannesburg.